Well, let's bring in a woman who has been at the heart of this fight going back so many years, Cindy Blackstock. She's the Executive Director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society of Canada, deeply involved in negotiations. Cindy, good to see you. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
Good deal for the people who were affected or not? What do you think?
I think it could be a good deal if it's implemented. Right now, it's words on paper, it's non-binding. And so what we need to do is see the government actually implement these measures to stop the ongoing discrimination. And also really important, Todd, to make sure it never happens again to another generation of kids.
So there is also room for improvement in the deal as well, you'd say?
Yeah, I think that there is. We want to make sure that there's some immediate relief for families and the provision of prevention supports to keep families together, for supports for young people in care and those young adults who are out of care. That needs to happen, but I think we're all realistic in knowing that we have to go out and work with communities to see what else could be done to really support them in this work.
The legal battle that went on for so many years, I mean, as you have pointed out in a number of interviews that you and I have done over the years, this notion that the Trudeau government, wanted to reconcile with Indigenous Canadians, and this agreement was part of that. I mean, part of this comes from all the legal pressure that was put on the federal government, correct?
Yeah, the legal pressure, and all really, really important, the public pressure. I really think, Todd, when Canadians started to see the children in the unmarked graves, that it really penetrated the Canadian consciousness, and people started being curious, like, what's going on our watch? Why is the federal government giving First Nations kids less money than other kids for essential public services? And they started to press for change. And the lesson here is that when the Canadian public does that, change can happen. If that kind of public pressure was there 20 years ago, this, to fix the problem, would have cost hundreds of millions of dollars versus tens of billions of dollars. And of course, most importantly, children wouldn't have lost their childhoods because there wouldn't have been victims of the discrimination because the problem would have been fixed.
Let's break it down a little bit. So 20 billion going to those who were discriminated against or family members, caregivers who took care of them. We're hearing about maybe 115,000 people in all. We're saying about $40,000 per person. That's the base. It could be higher. What do you think reaction will be from the people? And I know you know them personally, and you've been advocating on their behalf for so many years, Cindy.
I think it's really, really true that they will never get their childhoods back. But it is an acknowledgement by the government that they have discriminated in ways that separated families, that sadly contributed to the deaths of some children and the harms of others. And it's important for viewers to know that some of these are still children. We're talking about 5- and 6-year-olds, not just young adults who are going to be getting this compensation. And when I've talked to the young people, the First Nations young people in care, who I want to give a huge shout out to because they have been such important advocates for other young people in care, they've been saying, look, this money could be the difference for me living in a safe neighborhood. It could be the opportunity I need to go back to school. It could be the amount of money that I need to reconnect with my family and with my culture. So it's not a huge amount of money for a lost childhood, but it's a recognition, and it's at least get them a bit of a foothold for a better future.
And Cindy, for some viewers who might not be as familiar as you are, can you tell us what this discrimination actually looked like in practice?
It really was apartheid public services, Todd. That's what we're talking about. And that apartheid public service system hasn't really stopped across all the other areas like water, housing, etc. What happened is that the federal government funds public services on First Nations communities, but they've done so at far lesser levels than all other Canadians receive for decades, indeed over a century. And those cross-cutting inequalities meant that families were less able to recover from the trauma of residential schools. So you had all that trauma and you had less resources to do it. And then you had a Canadian public who didn't know any better, that was often judging people as if they got more, not less than everyone else. And so providing this equity at least gives people a chance at the community level with all the wonderful service providers we have across the country to be able to support families in their wellness so that they can really address that trauma and safely and raise their kids in ways that make their ancestors proud.
What are the next steps here, Cindy?
Well, we're going to see very quickly whether the federal government is going to land this. There are some measures it needs to put in place by April 1st. There needs to be a consent order that goes to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal so that young people get post-majority care and those prevention dollars flow. We should see that starting to happen in January. That'll be our first real indication of whether this is going to land. And then, of course, April 1st, we should see real change at the level of children and families.
And before we go, I'm curious how you are feeling today.
You know what? I feel really humbled. I'm thinking about all those kids that I really wish we could have helped. That had we been able to land the solutions to end this discrimination 20 years ago, we could have saved a lot of childhoods. But I'm so grateful to the Canadian public, to the First Nations leaders and the community members and the young people in care, and Jordan River Anderson's family for the gift they've given us of this opportunity to really not only end this discrimination for First Nations children, but to make the country better too.
Cindy Blackstock, the Executive Director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society. Cindy, always good to have you on my show. Thank you for this today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me, Todd.